Okay, before we get started, I would recommend that you go to the video description and grab the GitHub link to these materials. I designed these exercises so we can go through them together, so you can follow along with the video and the documentation. So this is part one of the series in deploying Active Directory in the cloud. And what we're going to do is use the AWS Directory Service, which is a platform as a service offering from AWS to deploy Active Directory without you having to manage these servers directly. And so what we're going to do is this is designed to be a push button install and gives you a complete AWS directory example. And we're going to do the following tasks in this example. It's all Terraform and shell scripts, so you should be able to run it end to end and you'll get this as the result without any changes. So the first thing is we do is we configure the networking. So we create two subnets and then the security groups necessary to access the various VMs or EC2 instances we're going to deploy. Then once we have the subnets working, we're going to deploy, and we have a subnet one in each availability zone. Typically in AWS, subnets are segmented by availability zone or data center, which is a little bit different than Azure and GCP, which typically the subnets segment by application or purpose. So once we do that, we're going to deploy the AWS Directory Service. That takes the majority of the build. It takes anywhere from 30 to 60 minutes. So, be prepared for a long wait when we actually run the apply. And then once that directory service has been deployed, what we do is we deploy a Windows EC2 instance and a Linux EC2 instance. Now, when the Windows EC2 instance starts up, it's going to run a PowerShell boot script or user data script, and in that, it's going to join the instance to the domain by using the domain join password from AWS Secrets Manager. And then it's going to create 4 users and groups. And this users and groups will be POSIX compliant. We'll talk about GID number, UID number, and we'll demonstrate how that's presented on the Linux side. Now, we do that so that we can then join the Linux server to the domain, and it sees all the users using the POSIX compliance mode. And we use TripleSD to do the Linux join and authentication. And then when we create those accounts, we're going to create secrets and secrets managers so that we can reference those credentials later. The passwords are randomly generated, so if you see a password in the script, it's just for my build. It's not for anything you can use. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go in and look in Active Directory and show you how it's presented, different users groups and where they are in the OUs. And then at that point, you can play with the solution, but you want to be a good steward of your cloud infrastructure. And this is particularly important for these AWS platform as service features. In particular, the cost for a simple managed Active Directory is several $100s a month. So you want to destroy the solution when you're done, so you don't get charged. Alrighty, so let's look at the diagram. First off, we implement this in US East 2, and we have 2 subnets. Now, there are 2 different availability zones, and what happens is the directory service ends up applying a 2 domain controllers, and underneath the covers are really EC2 instances, where they have deployed Active Directory across these 2 availability zones. And these DCs are also DNS servers. So part of the build is going to be after we spin up the Active Directory instance and get these domain controllers, we're going to have to change the DHC option sets so that the DNS source patch for everything in the VPC is going to go through the DNS servers first. And so that allows you to join and talk to the domain controllers. Then after that's done, that's the first phase of the build. We're going to join a Windows instance, and that Windows instance gets the credentials out of the Secrets Manager, so we put everything in Secrets Managers. Then it's going to create 4 groups and 4 users and store the credentials into the Secrets Manager so you can use them later. Then after that's done, there's also a Linux instance that gets joined, and it's going to also join Active Directory, get secrets for the join passwords, and that way You will have a Linux instance and a Windows instance, both joined to Active Directory. The Linux instance you'll see the UID number when we do the demo, but that's where it has to be POSIX compliant. So that is it for the architecture diagram. Now let's talk about the prerequisites. Now, we have a video out there called AWS and Terraform Easy Setup. If you've never done one of these videos before, you might want to go look at that video. And it does a very simple example with just a simple VM. It runs fast, so it's easy to verify quickly. But the three prerequisites for this project are obviously an AWS account. You need to have the AWS CLI, and then you need to have Terraform installed. So those are the three prerequisites. I'm going to assume that you've done that already. And so what we're going to do is we're going to now, at this point, it's time to get the code. So what you can do is copy this right here to download the code repository. And I will go to my Ubuntu development bar and do paste. And there you'll have it. Now I'm going to run checkenv, which will check to make sure I have all the right environment variables set. And it looks good. So at this point, all what I want to do is kick off the build. If I can type correctly. Alright, so there is the build starting. And while it's running, we'll briefly talk about the build process. And essentially it's two phases. The first phase creates the networking and also deploys the AWS Directory Service. This takes 30 to 60 minutes to complete, so it is not a quick process. And then once that is done, we have a second phase, and in that phase we are going to deploy a Linux and Windows EC2 instances, and their respective user data scripts will automatically join them using secret managers. The Windows one is a little bit special because it's going to create those 4 users and groups, and then at that point we'll be able to log in to the EC2 instances as the credentials that we've created with the 4 accounts and show how things work. So at this point we are ready to wait for the build to finish. Alrighty, the build has completed. So what we'll do at this point is we'll go into the AWS console and take a look at what got built. So go into your homepage and edit on your account. And let's start with the networking. So let's click on VPC. And what you will see is one VPC that is for the Active Directory. So you got AD VPC. It has a custom option set. So if I were to click on that option set, it's got the Mike Cloud domain DNS servers, the 2 domain controller instances. So that ensures that everything that gets loaded onto this network is going to have Mike Cloud in its DNS server sequence, search sequence. So let's go back to the VPCs, and so we've got that one. Then there are 2 subnets. There's AD subnet 1, AD subnet 2. They're in different availability zones, and that's what's actually going to have the domain controllers, and in addition to the domain controllers, the VM instances that we're going, or the EC2 instances we're going to deploy and connect to. So that's it for the networking. So let's go to the directory service. And in the directory service, you will see Mike Cloud. It's the standard Active Directory instance. You've got the network and connectivity, and you'll see what DNSs they're on. These DNS servers here are the ones that were in that DHCP option set. And it's got a bunch of different features. Most of them are turned off. There's a lot you can do with this Managed Active Directory. This is the sort of the most general vanilla version. And we've got the NetBIOS name. That's one thing that's unique to AWS is that NetBIOS name. You can't set that on any of the other ones. Now this is from a networking standard from like the 80s, so it's probably not a big deal, but it is sort of interesting that they do allow you could have a totally different NetBIOS name than in the the DNS name. So that's pretty much it for the directory. So now let's go to EC2 and let's look at the instances that we have created. So there's two instances, and the instance is we have the Windows instance, and that Windows instance you can actually click on it, and AWS is a little specific in that you can actually see your boot script. The other cloud providers that you set it and then you no longer see it. But here I can go and say, show me my user data. And this is where it's going to show you that script where we install the Active Directory components. We join the AC2 to Active Directory by going to Secrets Manager. Then we're going to create those 4 users and 4 groups. And then at the end, we grant mCloud users to be the remote desktop users, and then we reboot the instance. So that's the Windows instance, and that's how those users get created and get joined, and how the instance gets joined to Active Directory. So let's go back to the instances, and let's look at the Linux one. So there's the Linux one, and same deal. I can go in and say instance setting, edit user data, and you're going to see where it installs the packages for doing SSD, it installs AWS CLI, it gets the secrets from, or the AD credentials from the secrets, and then it does the join and sets some configuration things to make sure you can do password authentication. So that's the user data for the Linux instance, and I guess the final thing that gets created is I can go up here and say Secrets Manager, and click on that, open and new tab, and all those user accounts that got created by the Windows user data script are stored in here. So I can click on AD credentials, hit retrieve value, and it's going to give me the values for Active Directory. So now let's go back to the documentation and let's talk about that initial admin credentials. In AWS, it's dirt simple. The user account is admin, or the admin account is admin, so it's very simple. And this account has domain admin privileges, and it allows you to do pretty much everything. Now, AWS gives you as close as you can to having sort of a generic domain controllers or Active Directory setup. So you'll see that there's not a lot of controls over. Like I can go and actually delete this admin group, where the other providers they actually have safeguards so you can't delete the admin accounts in a certain part of the directory. With AWS, it's pretty much wide open, so you need to be careful. You can basically screw up your entire instance if you delete the wrong things. And all those credentials are stored in admin AD credentials. So this one's very easy. You set it in Terraform, it gets set, it's persisted until you change it. So now let's talk about those 4 users and groups. So there's 4 user groups: mCloud users, India, US, Linux admin, and you'll notice they have GID numbers of 10,001, 10,002, 10,003. And then for groups, we've got not only a GID number, which corresponds to these, so they're all going to be a member of mCloud users, but we also have the UID number. So what are these numbers? Well, these numbers are what's needed for POSIX integration, and it comes from an RFC from the late 90s that basically says if you want Linux and Windows to play together well with the same security model, the UID number, GID number, is the hook that allows Linux to know how to tag the users that are brought over by Active Directory. And so you have to set these, and we'll show you in the console how you set them. And when we go to the Linux instance, when we log into that, you will see, I'll do ID and get int, and you'll see what those user groups show up within the Linux. So you see it presented those POSIX permissions. So at this point, what we want to do is log into the Windows instance. Okay, so to log in the Windows instance, the first thing we need to do is we need to go back to the EC2 console. And let's click on that, and let's look at the Windows instance. And here it is. And let's go grab that public IP address. So do that. Then we'll bring it into here. And we'll bring up remote at, click on that. And I've already logged in once, but what you need to do is you need to use those mcloud admin. So we need to go back to a credential manager, and you'll see mcloud admin, copy that, go back to here, make sure it looks right, hit OK, and we're going to log in. And what you'll see when you log in is this server manager comes up, and that means you're a local admin to this account. So this is good news. We've logged in with the domain admin account, and we're now a local user. So what we also do is we install all the Active Directory administrative tools. So we want to click on Windows Administration, and from there it's got a bunch of Active Directory tools, but the one that's most relevant for what we're doing here is Active Directory users and groups. Alright, so we click on that, and what you want to do is click on Advanced Features. So I have it on my phone. Turn on Advanced Features, and then you can go to the mcloud. Now the thing about it is you got users and groups, and so like admin here, you'll see it doesn't segregate the by default doesn't segregate your users as you create the local domain users from the users it provides. So you probably should create your own I did that in the other ones, but pretty much you have free reign for this entire directory. I can do whatever I want. All these, AWS reserved. You can screw them up. You can add members to it, but you have full control. So it's more like a generic domain controller deployment or an Active Directory deployer than any of the other cloud providers. You have free reign to do whatever you need to do. And so let's look at some users. So let's look at India, and I'm going to do properties. And you'll see members, and you got the Kumar, Raj Patel, the generic India names I put in there. We go to attribute editor, and let's scroll down, and you'll see GID number like we set, and that's it for the groups. So then let's go to a user. Let's go to Raj Patel and do properties, and we can do member of, and you can see he's domain India Linux admins. Now one thing you'll notice is those UID and GID numbers that we're talking about, if you don't set them, you don't see the users. So you'll never see domain users because there's no GID or UID number. You will not see the admin account because it has no GID UID number. So you only get the users presented in Linux that have those attributes set. So if we go back to here and we can say, all right, we've got GID number, and that is set to 10,001. Now I choose 10,000 as my starting point because if you use lower, you'll run into some Unix or a Linux predefined, like SSM agent I think is 1,000. So I usually type 10,001. That's the safest. So we got the GID numbers, and then the other part that's important for it to be presented in Unix is the UID number. And there's the UID number. I can double click and add it in here. Typically you're going to create these in scripts, but you can add it in here. Alright, so we've got the Windows instance. Now I could log in if I go look at the computer's instance, let's see here, and do properties, and you can see remote desktop, select users, you'll see mcloud users. So all the users that we've created, Raj Patel, Emily Davis, I forget the other names, they can all log in through remote desktop because they've been authorized. So that's pretty much it for the Windows instance. So I will hit cancel, and I will close that. So now what we want to do is we want to look at the Linux instance. So to do that, what I'm going to do is go back to my instances, and I'm going to find my Linux instance, and I am going to copy that public IP address. Now I'm going to go into my MOBA. You can use any SSH client, but I typically use MOBA, and I'm going to say new session, and I'm going to say right there, and let's specify a login name of J Smith. Now we need to go back to the credentials manager and be ready for JSmith on the credential side. So if I hit retrieve value, there is the value for that. So let's go back to show, hit OK. And there you go. I've logged in. So I can do clear. I'll make it a little bit bigger so you can see it. Who am I? ID JSmith. It's 10,001. I can say get anti group mcloud users, and you're going to get all those guys. And I can say, all right, let me do A Kumar, ID Raptel, ID E Davis, and ID J Smith, John Smith. All right, so one thing you'll notice is J Smith, which is who I am, is a member of the Linux admins group. So I should be able to do sudo bash, and from there I'm now root. And the way that works is if you go to etc users sudo yeah sudo, damn it was right here. You can see if you go look at 10 Linux admins, when the server booted, it actually set up that. The other important thing here is if you go to etc cd ssd, and this is the configuration file for connecting Active Directory to the instance. So that is it for the Linux instance. You can log out, and again, all 4 users of mcloud users have the ability to SSH into this Linux instance. Okay, and now it's time for us to be good stewards of our cloud account, and we need to go and destroy. So let's go back to our build environment, and let's do destroy.sh. Now, the destroy doesn't take quite as long, but the reason you want to be a good steward here in particular is just that basic instance that we've booted up. It costs several $100s a month from AWS. So you probably don't want to run that up unless you actually want to use it. And so you want to make sure that you destroy the solution after you do it. Otherwise, you're going to run up a non-trivial bill. Let's just put it that way. So I'm going to hit destroy. And while that's working, let's talk about the AWS specific issues for it. I guess the first thing is this is the closest thing to a generic install of Active Directory in the cloud. There's no guardrails for deleting things, like I showed you the admin folder and the admin user. You can delete that and kind of screw yourself up. But ideally, you're going to create other users. You won't have just the admin user to log in. You'll have multiple accounts, so you can mitigate it that way. I talked about the net bias name. In the grand scheme of things, it's kind of silly. But I have on some projects I've often used a net bias name that's different than the actual domain name. You can only do that in AWS. The other providers, it chooses the short name by the first part of the domain name, which is probably not that big a deal. You just pick the short name to be whatever you want in the domain name. The other thing that's unique is the initial admin credentials are like butter. They're very easy. You just go in and you've got your Active Directory credentials. You set it in Terraform. We put it in Secrets Manager. You're ready to go. The other providers, you're left scratching your head a little bit. They're not quite as clear. I mean, once you understand them, they're straightforward enough. But in Amazon, it's just dirt simple. Okay, you also, if you want to use workspaces, and at some point I'm going to do a workspaces add-on to this, you have to create an AWS directory. Workspaces is Amazon's desktop as a service offering. It's pretty easy to configure. After you've done all this stuff, you basically register it, and then you can register your users. Like I said, I'm going to do a video on that. And then finally, the subnet issues. The subnetting works differently. In AWS, it's segmented mostly by availability zone and not necessarily by function. And the other cloud providers seem to do it by function. And so those are the AWS specific things. And if you enjoyed this one, there is a video on Azure and also a video on GCP doing the exact same scenario.